The man.
Here we go. Hello, welcome to This Dementia Life, created by Dementia Action Alliance. Our website is danow.org. I'm your proud host, Chuck McClatchy. My dementia life was Alzheimer's disease. During this Dementia Life podcast, we will have conversations with inspiring people living with dementia and amazing people that care about us. My host today, I couldn't be happier. He's a new board member on DAA, very good friend and advocate, Barney Nelson. So Barney, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and that incredible toolbox that you have?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, Chuck. I was diagnosed in January of 2019 with Lewy body dementia. Went through about a 8-month diagnostic process to get to that point, seeing various doctors and things like a DAT scan. And I learned a lot along the way. I did a certain amount of research myself. And it turns out my symptoms that I was exhibiting kind of fell right in line with Lewy body dementia. So it made it easier for me to kind of figure out what was going on. And in the process, I learned a lot about the diagnostic process. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. And it starts also with the fact that once I started really getting embedded into the dementia community, I would hear the same story very, very often. And that was all of the anguish, is one of the best ways to put it, fear and uncertainty that people would go through as they were trying to get the doctors to tell them what was going on with them, trying to get to the end of their own personal diagnostic process. So somebody would say, we know what's going on. Here it is. Here's the reality going forward. Boy, the first people I met, I was in a meeting with some folks, and they just said it was awful for them. It lasted 2 years. Nobody could tell them what was going on. In fact, there's a movie out right now called Robin's Wish. It's the Robin Williams story. And just repeatedly, they talk about his wife, his kids, talk about how the hardest part at all of the whole thing was just not knowing what had really happened to him and what he was going through and why he was, going through what he was going through. In the case of Lewy body dementia, until you have a post-mortem autopsy, you can't be 100% sure. So they do something called a probable diagnosis for Lewy body dementia. And that's based on, do you have a certain number of what they call the core characteristics, which in the case of Lewy body, a REM sleep disorder, which I had had for over a decade. Not uncommon, by the way, if you have extended REM sleep disorder, rapid eye movement sleep disorder, where you're acting out your dreams and springing out of bed and all those kind of things. Not uncommon, apparently, that if you have that for years and years and years, it may be a precursor to dementia. But it's also one of the core characteristics of Lewy body. Another one is tremors. And I'd always had a certain amount of tremors, but they were clearly getting worse, particularly with one hand versus the other. Cognitive issues is the third sort of core characteristic. I found multitasking to be, much more difficult. I could tell stories about it, but I, probably would take too much time. But, things I was able to do in the past, I owned my own business for 15 years leading up to this. And things that I was able to do, spreadsheets, responding to texts and doing emails all at the same time as necessary, found it really hard to do. The one thing, though, that was really the game changer for me was when I started having a certain amount of hallucinations, mostly at night, what are called hypnopompic hallucinations, where you might start waking up in the middle of the night and you're not quite awake and you start to see things. I found out fairly quickly that it had a lot to do with the shadows that were still in my room because of light coming into the windows, like street lamps and things like that. And my brain would turn those shadows into actual things. Might be animals, it might be things that are more sinister than that. But so my symptoms lined up very, very well. And that was part of the reason why I was able to get to a fairly quick diagnosis relative to what a lot of other people go through. Again, mine was about 8 months. I also did something that I'm going to show you here in a little bit, and it was my wife's idea to do this. I kept a log of events as they happened, whether it was hallucinations or cognitive events, and I would date stamp them. And I sent that log to the final neurologist I ended up with at Oregon Health Science University, who's just a specialist in these type of things. She's fantastic. She told me that the log really helped her out a lot with the diagnosis. In fact, the first time I met with her, she already had the information from previous work I'd done with a neuropsychologist and a neurologist. Plus she had the log, and she immediately started me on medication, even though she still wanted me to do what's called a DAT scan, which is particularly a brain scan that's particularly focused on more Parkinson's related types of issues, of which Lewy body and Parkinson's have some real similarities. And that's one of the things about them. So she already knew, though. I looked at her notes, at one point it was made available to me, and she'd already figured out what I had. So I was fortunate that way, but so many people are not. So many people, it can take a long time, and they hear one thing from one doctor, they hear another thing from another doctor. They know that something's not right. In fact, to them, lots of times it feels like it's getting worse, and they're very scared. And I just kept hearing this story over and over again. So one of the things I've been trying to do as part of being a dementia advocate is focus on the whole diagnostic process for dementia. And are there places that it can be improved? Are there places where time is leaking away and it's just taking longer than what it needs to? Can we shorten the process down so people get those answers in a quicker way, like they would so much desire, to do? So that's kind of what I've been doing. One of the things I've been doing, and of course, as a dementia advocate, I've been working with you, Chuck, and people in Dementia Action Alliance. Like you said, I'm on the advisory board, and I'm involved with some other organizations too. And I'm just finding a way to take this situation that I'm in and not let it have power over me, not let it control me. And I may need to pivot from time to time. As you've said, Chuck, there may have been 500 things you've done before, and now there's maybe only 300, but there's still 300 that you can do. And you focus on those types of things. I've started playing tennis again after 40 years of a break when it comes to that. I played in college for 4 years, but then I didn't want to play a whole lot after that. And then I started saying, hey, let me start playing tennis again. It's really good for the brain. You've got spatial type of issues going on with the ball coming at you. You've got strategy to figure out where you want to hit the ball and where you want to stand. There's always the aerobic benefit of that. I certainly do a lot of huffing and puffing, out on the court, out on the tennis court. So that's something I've started doing, and that's been really good because I'm playing really well. I'm improving really quickly, which is a good feeling. It's not like everything is just going sideways or downhill. That's not. I'm choosing to not let that happen as much as possible. Now, will that happen? Certainly. As time goes on, will I have less ability to have that control over my life and just decide this is what I'm going to do and that's just the way it's going to be and all that? Yes, probably. But for now, I'm not thinking about that and I'm not worrying about that.
I'm glad you said that because your outlook is so strong and needed for people to look at. I know a friend of ours, I know Mike Belleville.
Yeah.
He was initially diagnosed around the same time I was with Alzheimer's. But then I think it was 2 or 3 years later, it took for them to finally change his to Lewy body.
Yeah.
And people do. I was very fortunate. Within a matter of months, I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's from the time I went in. I was lucky. The symptoms and stuff were there, and I went to a doctor who specialized in it. But that's not always the case.
No.
And why don't you go ahead with your, how kind of that toolbox that you've come up with about, helping the doctors?
Yeah, I started thinking about, the fact that my doctor told me that having a log really helped her a lot in getting it to her in advance, helped her out a lot in terms of the diagnosis. And then I started thinking about, there are about 30 symptoms. I mean, there's more than 30, but 30 kind of major symptoms of some form of dementia. And to the extent that you could let the doctor know in advance or at the time you're seeing the doctor, the symptoms you're having and the onset date of those symptoms, because onset date is something that can be very important, particularly in Lewy body. There's 2 different types of Lewy body. which one you have depends on the onset of Parkinsonism, tremor type of stuff versus cognitive types of issues. And that's how they decide, at least currently, how they give you that probable diagnosis we talked about. So I started thinking about, there's some really simple tools that could be utilized and put in people's hands. Let me see if I can share my screen here. So I put together this website right here, and I call it Dementia Symptoms Tracking Tools. And in it, as you can see up here, there's a home, there's an about, there's a little thing about me and my own particular situation. There's a section called Tools, and a suggestion that I really hope, I get a lot of traction with, called Suggest Tools. Because I really think there could be some reimagination of the dementia process, dementia diagnostic process, if we just could sort of harvest all the ideas that people have out there based on what they went through. And so I had a section here where people can put down some of their own ideas of tools that might work for them and help them. If we go to this tool section here, there's a description here of the tools, how to use them, and then you can download them. It's a PDF document, and you can download them for free. Just download them. So either you download these and you fill the thing out, you and your care partner fill them out, or the doctor hopefully starts the neurologist starts handing these out ahead of time, or when the person comes in and says, keep a log, keep track of some of these things. Now let's take a look at some of these tools here, if we could do that. There's really only 2 of them, and really nothing big here. Honestly, Chuck, all I did was take Excel spreadsheets and do a few things. Now I hope that's big enough for people to be able to see. Is that going to work, do you think, Chuck? You want a little bigger? Let me see if I can do that then. How's that? Is that a little better? A little more still? A little more still. All right, we'll do that. Okay, here we go. That's going to be good, I think, right? So I call this first one the screening aid and log, and you can see that it starts breaking out some of the dementia symptoms into categories, such as cognitive types of issues, conversing, behavioral, mood, psychological, and muscular physical. And then under each one, there are individual symptoms that are listed. And all you do simply is you go through here and you put an X. Sorry, I've got this shaky hand here, and with this mouse sometimes it really makes it hard. But you just start putting an X through here, whether it's you, yourself, you and your caregiver, or whatever makes sense. And you put X's besides the ones that make sense for you that you've been experiencing, but you also have an onset date. And I mentioned that onset date is really important when it comes to Lewy body dementia. I'm not a doctor, but I have a little bit of a suspicion that onset date of particular types of symptoms might be illustrative as to, what's going on with somebody and help the diagnostic process. I don't have any data to back that up. It's just kind of more of a gut feel. But for example, if you go down here to muscular physical, tremors, unsteady walking, falling, dizziness, constipation, urinary incontinence, sleep disorder like REM sleep disorder, spatial awareness. Well, as it just so turns out, if somebody is putting an X beside most of those, there's a good chance that they might be in that Lewy body space, as one example. So you can imagine that if you filled this out and then you also filled this out, this is this log idea. It's really pretty simple. Just put the date down and then a description and detail of the symptoms and log them. You hand fill these things out, nothing that they have to enter in via a computer. We want to make this as simple as possible. We're not storing this information. It's not like you're going to fill these documents out and put them back on the website I put together. I don't think the HIPAA folks would like that. So, you just start filling these things out. If you need to, if your log gets too long, you just print out another copy of this thing that's blank and continue to fill it out. You can imagine now if you're armed with this information and the information we just looked at, and you're walking into a doctor's office, usually what happens is the first thing is you meet with the nurse, and the nurse says, "So why are you here?" Well, I kind of feel like I've, forgetting things a lot, and it feels like it's different for me. Like I'm just worrying about dementia, whatever types of thing. Oh, really? Well, what kind of things are going on with you? Well, I'm forgetting this, I left my keys, 6 different places in the course of about a half an hour. I put my milk in the dishwasher, why I have no idea, on and on and on. And she goes, okay, well, we'll have the doctor come in and talk to you. So you wait there for a while in the room, and then the doctor comes and says, okay, what's going on with you? Well, da, 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 and then you hopefully can remember all of the symptoms and the time frames and things that have been going on with you and the cognitive events you had, the hallucinations, whatever, and you hopefully can remember them all. And then what they tend to do is they look at you and they say, what is actually makes perfect sense is they say, let's do a little bit of testing here, see where you're at, and then I want you to come back in about 3 months, and we're going to see if there's any kind of downward type of trend, with you. I call it the wait and see strategy. It's really kind of what has to happen at first. And it's one of the reasons why early on in the diagnostic process, it is a slow moving process because they need to see a trend over a period of time. But the extent that you can have these things filled out and continue to fill them out and update your doctor with these, it's all the data, hopefully coalesced in one type of place. And it really helps them to see, you go back here to this one and, the doctor can say, okay, that's interesting. And the doctor can ask follow-up questions too. You've X'd this one, tell me a little more about this, or this one, tell me a little more about this. You're enabling the doctor with the information they need to get to a diagnosis. And hopefully these are tools that can speed up the process, which is the real problem statement that we're trying to address. Now, there's one other thing that I want to add to this. One of the things that can happen is denial, Chuck. There can be denial with people that are having issues. And maybe you're a loved one of somebody that is in sort of more in denial. And maybe you've suggested to them that they go see a doctor or whatever, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. Well, perhaps what you can do is you can sit down with this person and you can say, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we just keep track of some things that you're seeing? And here's an easy, simple way to do it. Let's go through here and let's just say, what about this one? What do you think about that one? What do you think about that one? What's the onset date? Let's go through this log here. What are some things that have happened? And I do think there's a potential there that as somebody begins to go through and fill this out with a caregiver, or the caregiver fills it out for the person and they share the data, this might be a little bit of an eye opener for somebody who is in denial. Might say, you know what, there really are some things that are going on here that I'm seeing here. I kind of forgot about the fact of this one or that one or whatever. And maybe this is a way that some of that denial brick wall can begin to come down a little bit, because I don't believe denial really helps. In fact, I think the opposite. I think if you can get to acceptance, that's when the real living, can start with somebody who has dementia. There's the old denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Well, if you can get to acceptance, that's a really good place to be. So I hope that these tools to some extent can help. I don't know for sure, but I hope to some extent they can help with with denial, and help people work with somebody that is in denial. That's my hope, Chuck. What do you think? You think that might help?
Oh, I think it'd be amazing. I think we always talk about people having that initial conversation, and coming in with facts, not just, well, you're doing this and you're doing this, but being able to sit down as a family and saying, okay, I got this list of things that I want to know about. Are you doing this? This is what is happening to you. I can see this, and this.
Right.
And provide it to him as, this is what I see, and because that conversation is so doggone important, because that denial can be so destructive. I remember a couple that was in a support group with us, and he was in complete denial.
Yeah.
He would come to the support group, but none of his family could know. And his wife was caught between such friction with all of the family. What's wrong with dad? What's wrong with dad? Well, nothing, and that just creates unbelievable stress. And like you said, nothing good comes out of that. This, to be able to come in and give it to a doctor and says, this is what's been transpiring, I think is amazing. And even if it cut the diagnosis time in half, that's some people going from 4 or 5 years to maybe a year and a half or 2 years,
Yeah.
which is long enough as it is. But keep these people out of limbo. How did you kind of, in your mind, come up with this? I mean, it seems like it's one of those things that says, duh, why
Yeah.
hasn't somebody else done it? How did you kind of get past that?
Well, and to be fair, if you look on the web, I did find a few other examples of people that put together, the same type of basic symptom tracker type of tool in a different format, but the same type of idea. So I didn't find them until after I had done my own. Maybe I would have just used theirs. But well, again, I want to credit my wife for the log part of it, keeping track of the log and logging what's going on. It was her idea. She says, "Why don't you start keeping a log? You're having these hallucinations that are becoming more frequent, cognitive issues, everything else. Why don't you just keep a log?" And so, boy, that's easy to do. You saw what I did. It was just a simple Excel spreadsheet, and I just took out a lot of the lines and wrote a few things down there and made sure that it would be date stamped and there'd be enough room so people could handwrite in stuff. Again, didn't want to make this as simple as possible. You don't have to go into a spreadsheet and put in, type in exactly what's going on with you and all that. You just handwrite it. If you need to handwrite, on 6 copies of that thing, who cares? That's probably good data. So that was pretty easy. That one was my wife's idea. The second one was more like, when you think about it, a dementia diagnosis is all about symptoms. And, and it's also about the onset of those symptoms, but it is about symptoms. That's how we figure out what's going on with you. At least that's how they hope to figure out what's going on with you. The brain is the most complex organ in the body, and dementia, not surprisingly, is probably the most complex disease that anybody can have. And the latest thoughts are there are more than 100 different dementias, which shocks most people. Most people don't realize that at all, So, and to make matters even worse, you can have more than one dementia at the same time. You can have vascular dementia and Alzheimer's dementia. Go figure. So, to be fair to our medical folks, our friends in the medical community, they got a really tough job. Now, there's increasingly technology like DAT scans, I mentioned, things like that. But anyways, somehow it just seemed to me that if you could keep track of the symptoms and start writing them down and get that to your doctor, maybe before you can go in and talk to them, take a look at it in advance, it's bound to get them closer to this finish line that we're all trying to get to. And that's exactly why I put on that website. You remember we talked about suggest tools. I really hope people go to the website if they think of other things that can be done to cut the time out, where time is bleeding away. It doesn't need to be, or leaking away. It doesn't need to be leaking away, and make some suggestions. We'll coalesce all those, put them together. And, if you're comfortable with us putting them up on the website, we'll do that. All that stuff is free that we do. So, but I really hope that we get some really good ideas here, head towards almost a reimagining of sorts of the personal diagnostic process for dementia that people go through. The doctors I've shown these tools to so far say they think it would really help them. So far so good, but we're just starting.
Well, it's amazing you take something that happened to you that could, put you in such a dark place in the beginning, and then to be able to come out and want to help other people and come up with this, I think is just amazing that you have the ability to do that. Not everybody does. A lot of people get lost on the way, but I think it really shows true character of somebody when you can fight through something like this that we know is debilitating, or it can be, and kind of make a decision that you're not only going to get through it positively, but you're going to bring other people along with you. And I think that is one of the most endearing things about you, and all the things that you've done, and helping your wife with the company and everything, and doing this and being active with DAA, and showing your face, showing your telling your story, I think is so important. And how much your family is involved in everything, I think shows another step in the right direction, and shows how important things like that are. And you always use a little bit of humor too.
Oh, absolutely.
Wife told me some nice stories about you. So
Well, Chuck, we both play a sport that is just fertile ground for humor, and that's called golf.
yes, it is. And if
I
you
gotta,
can't
I
laugh
gotta tell
out
you though,
there,
based on what you're saying though, understand that I went through an 8-month process, and through almost all that process, I guess it's just in my nature, I was investigating, I was researching, I was learning about things, and I was narrowing down myself, what was going on with me. So to some extent, I was going through that process that we're talking about, it can be, the old denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance type of thing. Honestly, by the time I finally met with my really, really best neurologist that I'm still working with, I kind of already knew what I had. It just so happens, like I said, that my symptoms just lined up very well. Mine was not a complicated diagnosis relative to what other people go through, but I had been researching all along. And so as a result, I'm going through the process. And I was taking my wife through the process with me, which is really important. She was with me on every doctor's call. Lots of times they would ask her questions rather than me, or I'd say something and they'd look at her like, is he crazy or what? Is he telling the truth or what do you think? So that's another thing I really do recommend is that you involve somebody with you in the process that can give the doctor an objective viewpoint, because otherwise there's a certain amount of doubt that sometimes they have about how much can they, trust the validity of what they're hearing from this person. So when they have an objective person, they're saying, yeah, I've seen him do this. And I would look at my wife sometimes and say, I don't know, what do you think? When they would ask me a question. And I think that helps the process too. It also helps her, the loved one, kind of go through that process and maybe get to that really good space we're talking about called acceptance, which is where the real strength, that's where the real strength can kick in right there.
our Bobby and I went through the same thing. She never missed a meeting and stuff. And every time it's, honey, what else can you say? And maybe she could bring up a few things that maybe I forgot about.
Yeah.
But, we basically validate each other's complaints about exactly what's going on. Well, it's already been the time. I could talk to you for another hour on this, Barney, but I have one question. I even asked your wife. I ask everybody that comes on, if this is the first podcast somebody who just got diagnosed sees, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that ultimately, once you find out about this, it doesn't mean that you have to change in some radical way, and it certainly doesn't mean that it has to define you. Now, as you progress in a degenerative disease like this, it does begin to define you more and more as time goes on, because there's more and more limitations you have. That's the reality of the scenario. But particularly early on, I'm playing tennis now. I'm still playing golf with friends. There's no label across my head that says dementia. I'm still Barney, for now, and that's how long for as long as I can make it that way, I'm going to just believe I can, and I'm going to continue to move forward. Some people lose friends, terrible situation, because people don't know how to act around you. If you accept what you're going through and you're laughing about it and all that kind of stuff, you see this kind of relief that comes over your friends. It's like this, oh, okay, he's still there. Barney's still there and Barney's okay. And you know what? You don't lose a lot of friends in that case. Or if you do, maybe they weren't your friends anyway.
That's so well put, that because I tell everybody that, that when you can make somebody laugh, you lower all of those, the sorrow part, the tragedy part, the what do I do part, it kind of goes away.
Yeah, it really does.
Still there, he can laugh. So that means I'm not going to say something wrong, and it kind of opens up conversation between everybody where they can actually ask you questions.
Yeah.
And Barney, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. It's been just a hoot to have you with us. I thank you so much.
It's always great to talk to you, Chuck.
I'd like to thank Dementia Action Alliance and their support. On behalf of this Dementia Life, I would like to thank you for joining us today. You can view other podcasts on our website, DA Now. Click on podcasts. Join us again to meet the most inspiring and amazing people on This Dementia Life. I'm your host, Chuck McClatchy. Remember, the brain may forget, the heart never will. We'll see you next time on This Dementia Life.